Hi everyone, this is Sean Ismail from Cloud Ranger blog, and you are viewing the Microsoft Azure training. In today's session, we are going to talk about creating virtual machines in Azure, the basics. The reason I say this is the basics is because I'm not going to get into all the exam requirements for creating virtual machines in Azure yet in this session. There's going to be a separate session which is going to be much more detailed, covering all the aspects of the exam for creating virtual machines in details. The reason I wanted to do this session with the basics is because I wanted to get into the session on virtual networking in Azure. And what I felt was that previously in other sessions, we really did not get into too many details in creating the virtual machines. So to effectively learn networking, we have to make virtual machines communicate to understand the concepts behind everything. And I felt that this session with the basics of creating a virtual machine would be beneficial to get started for that session in networking. So this is the basics. So let's get started. What we understand is that virtual machines, they are the building blocks of Azure infrastructure as a service. When we talk about infrastructure, the first thing that comes to mind is virtual machines. And obviously, when you are creating the virtual machines, the infrastructure comes to mind where we're talking about physical infrastructure that will host or that will run your virtual infrastructure. So if you are already familiar with virtualization technologies such as Hyper-V or VMware or any other vendor's virtualization solution, this will be a very easy session for you to understand and follow because essentially what we are doing here is creating virtual machines based on virtualization platform and Azure being our underlying platform here rather than Hyper-V or VMware. So if you already have been creating virtual machines in your lab or in your organization, you already know that you have to take certain things under consideration when you are creating your virtual machines. And first thing you always consider is the underlying hardware, the platform you are running your virtual machines on or creating your virtual machines on. And in our scenario here, the underlying hardware is obviously provided to you by uh, Microsoft Azure. And that's something that's beneficial for being in a cloud that you don't have to go right now and spec out servers and do anything as such. It's already taken care of for you. The next thing you consider is the storage, where you are going to install all these virtual machines. Where are they going to reside? If you are in a lab, then you are probably using your local storage or a direct attached storage. And if you're in an organization, you're probably using something more robust, such as a SAN or storage area network. Similarly, in Azure, you have to think about where do you want to place all your virtual machines in. The next thing is the network. And by network here, I also again mean the physical network, the routers and switches, cables. If you have been already virtualizing, you understand that creating a virtual network is relatively very simple and it's very flexible in what you can do. And it's similar in Azure as well. You can create as many virtual networks you really want to run your virtual machines on. The next thing is software, and by software here I mean the operating system. Like for example, you use Microsoft servers, Windows Server, or Windows client operating systems, or Linux, or any other operating system that you are going to run. And in Azure, those are provided to you in OS images, pre-built images, or you can also create an image of your own in Azure. So those are the considerations that you have to take before creating a virtual machine, both as a physical aspect and a virtual aspect. So today in your virtualization infrastructure, if you want to go and create a virtual machine, these are the things you would think of. And we similarly think of things like this in Azure as well. In our basics session today, we are not going to go and create the storage or the network ourselves. That's why this is the basics, because I'm not going to get into too many details on creating a storage account and storage and storing everything in there. I'm going to let Azure do all of that for us. The goal of this session is to actually get you up and running with virtual machines as quickly as possible and show you various characteristics and properties of the virtual machines. So in the future sessions on networking, or anything else, it's easy for you to create a couple of virtual machines and follow along. Now, when I say that these are the basic considerations that you have to make, while creating a virtual machine in Azure or any virtual infrastructure, in a cloud like Microsoft Azure, there are other considerations that you have to take, and we are not going to get into that many details today, such as the cloud services and other things. So we are just going to keep this very simple to get you started. Having said that, I'm going to jump into our client operating system here where we are going to run the Azure portal from. So just give me a moment here. Okay, so we are at our browser here, and you can see I'm already at azure.microsoft.com site. So we are going to go log into our portal, and the account we have been using is Cloud Ranger blog at hotmail.com. You will obviously enter the account you already have to follow along. Put in our password. And as you can see, we are in our Azure portal, Azure Manage portal here. This is not the preview portal. We'll be doing most of our work here. Under all items, as you can see, there's nothing right now except the default directory. There's a notification here about the free trial. Just going to get rid of that. And as you can see over here, everything is zeroed out, so there's really nothing that we have. I pretty much removed everything for this session here today. So the first thing we are going to do is create a virtual machine. So the way you do that is if you go to virtual machines right now, it says that there are no virtual machines that have been created. You can go and click on New. And the first thing we are going to do is a quick create. So with a quick create, what happens is that you provide the least amount of information to create the virtual machine, and Azure decides on other things for you. So the first thing we are going to do is put in a name for this virtual machine. So let's call our one Cloud VM 1000 or 100. And the software or the operating system, as you can see, there is a lot of them you can pick from here. These are basic images. So we are going to take, for our purposes here, Windows Server 2012 R2 Data Center. And for the size, I'm going to go for something basic, like an A2. And don't worry about all this. In our future session on creating virtual machines, we'll go through all the details of all the images and all the sizes that you have over here. So you need a username. So I'm going to put my username over here. You can obviously put whatever you want to. I want to show a couple of things here. You see this green check mark over here. It means that this name is actually available here. So the DNS name, which will be your virtual machine name, as you'll see, it is something that's going to be publicly accessible. So what I mean by that is that you should be able to go to cloudvm100.cloudapp.net and it will resolve to a public address. That means that if this is not unique or somebody else has it, you basically won't be able to take that. So let's try something more simple and a little bit general, and you'll see that somebody already has taken it. So if we actually chose Cloud VM1, you can see a little red exclamation over here. It says a hosted service with a specified name already exists. It means that there is a DNS entry already made for this by Microsoft. Somebody else is using it and you cannot. And So I do something unique here like Cloud VM 100. That means if somebody else was going to use Cloud VM 100, it will let them know that somebody else is using it already. Since this is a quick create, we do not have too much control on what we are doing here, but when in later part of the session, I'll show when we're custom creating a virtual machine, you will be able to change the inside name of the virtual machine. And so you can have a separate DNS name and a separate name for the virtual machine itself. But for our purposes, quick create here, you do not have that control. So whatever the DNS name is going to be, that's going to be the name of your server as well. Okay, so let's choose a region for us. So I'm going to use the East US2. You are obviously going to use the ones that's most closest to you. And that's all really is there to create this virtual machine. We are going to just do create a virtual machine. And as you can see, it started provisioning this virtual machine here. It's creating the storage account for you. So this takes a little while, couple of minutes in some cases to bring up a virtual machine because it's just doing so many things in the back end. And you'll appreciate that if you have used other cloud technology like Hyper-V, where it goes and right now starts bringing up the operating system, then provisioning that, then starting up the virtual machine and doing everything for you. So when we talked about considerations like storage, networking, and all that, in Quick Create, as you can see, it went and created the storage account. So it created the account where it's going to go and store your virtual machine in. And in Azure, those are the things that you can create yourself to have more control on. But in a Quick Create, Azure is doing that for you. Ideally, in an organization, you don't want Azure to do that for you. You want to have an Azure storage account that you have created, and you go place your virtual machines in containers there to keep all of them together. And in Quick Create, obviously, we don't have control over all of that. So I'm going to pause here a little bit and let this finish and then get back to you. Okay, that took about 3 minutes for me to create this virtual machine Cloud VM 100. So now that the virtual machine is created, you can see under status that it's running. So let's go over some information of this virtual machine. So right from here, you can see the virtual machine's name is Cloud VM 100. The status is running. It's running under the free trial subscription or the subscription you'll have. The location is quite important because that's where the data centers it's running at is in East US 2. And the DNS name for this is cloudvm100.cloudapp.net. So let's get into this virtual machines settings and configurations here and see what else we can see. So this is the basic dashboard. So we'll go to the dashboard here. So in a quick glance, you can see details over here as well, the status, the DNS name, the host name is same as the DNS name here. This is the public virtual IP or VIP or VIP as they call it. This is the address. So your Cloud VM 100 will essentially resolve to that. This is the internal IP address of the virtual machine, our size, location as well. You can see all that from here. There is an extension that Azure created for you. It's the BG info, and I'll show you what that is. In here, the other important thing I want you to note here is the endpoints. So you can see PowerShell and remote desktop. This is what will enable us to actually remotely connect to this virtual machine. So I want to bring up another point here is that when you are using Hyper-V, for example, and you create a virtual machine, even if you do not provision the network or the network is still not accessible for the virtual machine, you can actually go to the console of the virtual machine. So it's basically getting into the virtual machine's desktop and then start configuring everything. At least in Microsoft Azure right now, you do not have access to a console. So the only way you can actually get into a virtual machine desktop would be after Azure has provisioned the networking for you. And when we did this quick create, uh, Azure did all of that for you. There is a network that we will connect to. It's already mapped to a public address and a DNS name. Azure has already done that all for you. And we looked at that information over here, the DNS name as well as the public IP address. So technically, we'll be creating an RDP session to remote into this virtual machine. There's no console access. So if this virtual network and this virtual IP addresses and host name for the DNS was not created by Azure, we would not be able to connect to this virtual machine. This is good in some certain sense that everything is done for us and we can just get into the virtual machine. But there are times that it has happened to me before where I was playing around with the internal IP addresses or did something with the adapters, and the virtual machine sort of lost access to the network. Since I did not have a console access to that virtual machine, there was nothing much I could do to salvage that virtual machine. And essentially, I had to create a new virtual machine from scratch just because I lost access to the virtual machine I had created. Now, there are workarounds. So like you saw that when we went over here under endpoints, we did have PowerShell. So even if for some reason you messed up the remote desktop, you could use the PowerShell to connect from the backend from the Azure Management Console and do stuff there. But now, if you have broken the virtual adapter, then you do not even have access to that. And there are other ways that we will explore in future sessions to gain access back to your virtual machine if you have done something where you have sort of locked yourself out from connecting to the virtual machine. But for now, Azure does not have any console that you can just log into and look into those things. So now that we have covered some settings over here, let's go ahead and try to access the virtual machine. So you can do that from here once you go to your virtual machines panel here. I actually want to mention one more thing before we get there. When you see cloudvm100.cloudapp.net and the public IP address, I want you to know that this is not the public IP address of the virtual machine. This is actually the public IP address or the public virtual IP of the cloud service. So if you go to the cloud services over here, then you can see that there is a cloud service that was created, and that pretty much takes you to your virtual IP. You can see over here, you can see the deployment name. So this is actually a cloud service, and you can see the input endpoints here as well. This is not the virtual machine. And it's important to know that because when we get into cloud services, we'll understand that your cloud services does not only have virtual machines, it can have other things as well. And as far as networking is concerned, your virtual machine just basically has an internal IP address right now, and your cloud service is mapped to allow you to access that virtual machine through that IP address and the ports that's mentioned in the endpoints here. So to get to the remote desktop, we know that 3389 is the port number, but the cloud service, it's 63233 or something random that it picked up, and it's doing a port address translation or PAT for you networking guys. So this is more evident when we will try to connect to the virtual machine. That's why I wanted to bring that up right now. But for all purposes, you can RDP based on that information here. So if we go right now to connect and click on that, you'll see that it's trying to download an RDP file with all the information for you. So let's go ahead and save that on the desktop. And we will go through the RDP file to show what information does it have. So let's minimize that and edit this RDP. As you can see, it already has entered this information for you. So cloud VM 100.cloudapp.net, the DNS entry is already done by Azure. So this is nothing that I had to do. It did it all by itself. And it's connecting to that RDP port. So it's masking that 3389 port that usually we know is for RDP. So as for the security perspective here, that's excellent because besides you, nobody will really know what the port is for connecting to that RDP. And it's going to translate that to 3389. So it has already done that for us. So I'm going to go ahead and put the username that we have here. And let's connect to this session. This is the password that we had put in for the virtual machine when we created it. And that's all that is really to connect to this virtual machine. As you can see, this is a basic RDP right now, and this was all created for us by Azure, so we did not have to do any settings besides putting in the regular information that we did in Quick Create. So we sort of got this virtual machine up and running in just a few minutes. This is the first time we are logging in, so you can see that it's creating the personalized settings. Take a few seconds for us to log in here. And while it's doing that, you can see we are connected to cloudvm100.cloudapp.net. And if we go back to the dashboard here, the cloudvm100.cloudapp.net is under the DNS name. And what we are going to do is do a quick lookup. So I'll go to my command prompt here and do a ns lookup on cloudvm100.cloudapp.net, and I want to show you something really quick. You can see that the address it resolved to was 104.209.128.105, and you can see that is your public virtual IP address, the VIP. So these addresses and this DNS entry was done for us by Azure. So this is why we are able to connect to this virtual machine using that. And the endpoints is what was dictating that the port we are going to connect to. So this is a basic Windows server. So it's bringing up the dashboard for the server manager. So we'll just quit that. This is the BG info thing that was actually deployed when we created the virtual machine. So you can actually see it's a neat little thing as an add-on that you can see. You can look at all the information. The public IP is given over here, the internal IP address, the host name. You can see the amount of memory. So it's a neat little tool that gives you that information right on your desktop. And it's when you have multiple RDP sessions open, it's pretty neat to have. And this was deployed with the OS image. So that's how you get into the virtual machine. It's very simple. We clicked on connect, it downloaded the RDP file, we put in our username and password, and we were in here. Now, let's go ahead and check a couple of things here. I'm going to go to the command prompt and look for my IP address. So I'll do an ipconfig, and you can see that the IPv4 address here is 176.122.12. Once again, this was something that was given to us by Azure. This is the internal address of the virtual machine. So this is the internal IP address that we are seeing here on the portal. And we have not specified this, and if you're looking at this weird range for this IP address here, do not worry. We'll cover that in the networking section on how to implement our own virtual network and IP schemes. to extend our on-premise, for example, or have our own virtual network here in Azure. We do not have any control on the public IP address that's given by Azure, and those are the things that Azure does for us. So that is all there to create a virtual machine and connect to it when we do a quick create. Now, we want to go and explore one more way of creating a virtual machine here where we will have a little bit more control than the quick create options that were given to us. So similarly, we are going to go to new, and under compute virtual machines, we went to quick create last time, and this time we are going to use from gallery. So by going to the gallery, it gives us certain advanced options to create a virtual machine. So the first thing that you will notice here is that it's going to ask you to choose an image, and these are the images that already Azure provides to you. You can see it's not only operating system, you can also have things like SQL image. So this operating system or this VM that you will create by clicking on this option would actually install the SQL Server 2014 for you. So for a rapid deployment, this is excellent. You can see that besides Windows operating systems, there are Linux operating systems there as well. So you can, for example, create a virtual machine with Ubuntu in it. You can see there are other images where it's Windows Server, but it already has, for example, SharePoint here, SQL servers here. So these are pre-built images given to you by Microsoft Azure. Having said that, when we go through the virtual machine proper session, we will go through creating images on our own and uploading that. So if you have an imaging infrastructure in your environment where you have an operating system that you create and you put certain other pre-built applications in there as well, and you want to add those to the lists over here and deploy by yourself, you can do that as well. So for now, you can see under my images and my disks, I do not have anything, but I could have done that. The other thing to note here is when you create a virtual machine in Azure, the price includes the licensing for you. So let's go to the virtual machine over here, and you can see that, let's see the properties of that virtual machine. So I'll go to this PC, and I want to go to properties real quick, and you can see Windows is activated. So the key is already provided. So the price of this virtual machine running includes the licensing. So that's one good thing already taken care of for you by Azure. Now, when you are bringing your own image, obviously you have to provide your own licensing for that image, and it's not going to be provided to you. But all the images that you are seeing over here, even if it's going to be something like as a SQL server, so if we go and deploy this image here, which is going to be SQL Server 2014, already pre-installed, pre-configured for you, the price of this virtual machine is going to be a little bit more than a regular VM because the licensing cost is also absorbed in running that virtual machine. Anyways, we'll go into details for that later, but for now, we are going to just choose the Windows Server 2012 R2 Data Center. Click on the little next arrow over here. There are several versions here. I'm going to take the latest image version. We are going to call this virtual machine Cloud VM 200. We are going to choose the basic tier. So in the quick create, we already did all of this as well. You remember it was basically this first screen. So this is no different. I'm going to put in all this information and click on next. And as you can see here, now we are getting into more advanced setting for that virtual machine that we did not have available to us in the quick create. So it's actually asking us, do you want to create a new cloud service? And there was a Cloud VM 100 service created for us when we did a quick create. So we are going to just say create a new cloud service. this is the DNS name. As you can see, you could change the DNS name here. So technically, your virtual machine name is going to be Cloud VM 200, but here we could have had a different machine. So we could have called this, for example, ftp.cloudapp. Obviously, it's not going to be available because do remember that this is the public DNS and somebody might have already taken it or it's already reserved. So you could do a different public DNS name here. For our purposes here, we're going to just keep it the same. So it's going to be Cloud VM 200. As you can see, it's available here. For the region, we're going to pick East US 2. You can pick the one you need. And this is where you would actually also choose, we just have regions here, but you could have chosen a region or an affinity group or a virtual network. And we'll go into details on this later in another session. But what I'm trying to show here is that these are all the advanced options available to you to create this virtual machine. For the storage account, this was the storage account that was created by Azure for us when we created the last one. If you had a storage account created by yourself, you could have chosen that here, but for our purposes, we're going to leave that behind. Availability set, we are not going to do anything. Here, as you can see, it is giving us more options to add other endpoints if we really wanted to. So there are some pre-built endpoints. So if I wanted an HTTP access given to this virtual machine, I could have done HTTP, and you can see it's giving you that port 80 for the public and private port. So right now, we could go to this virtual machine and put that, go HTTP and Cloud VM 200.cloudapp.com, and it would allow us to connect to that. So let's leave that on. And these are all part of the advanced settings. And here you can see it's creating the VM agent for us. It's going to install the VM agent. Here it's giving us some more options. So you could put in Microsoft anti-malware or semantic endpoints and things like that. But we are not going to do all of that. We're going to just click on the complete. And similarly, like we did with the quick create, it's actually creating this virtual machine for us. So this is going to be similar steps. So the difference between the quick create and the regular create from the gallery was that when we went to the gallery, it gave us more advanced options to choose. So when we talked about considerations like your storage, considerations like your network and operating system, the software, this is where we would be in the gallery to actually do that, because eventually we are going to create our own cloud service to do that. We are going to have a single storage account where we will put all the virtual hard disks, the VHDs, together to keep them in one place and more organized. So for now, we are asking Azure to do all of that for us, to take all these decisions for us. And that's why this is the basic series where we are just trying to get these virtual machines created up and running. So this is going to again take a few minutes, and I'm going to pause the video and get back when they're up and running. All right, that took a few minutes, and this time I left the notification over here to just show what all it did. It successfully created the virtual machine, it provisioned the virtual machine, it installed the extensions, and the extension here was the BG info. When we logged into the virtual machine here, this is what the BG info actually is. So it actually deploys the extension for doing that. Similar to our Cloud VM 100 here, with the 200 you can see this was the DNS. There's a quick way to actually copy that from here. So you can actually copy that DNS name from here, but we are using Cloud VM 200. Let's go quickly in the VM here, and we are going to notice the status over here. So we are going to look at the DNS name, host name. As you can see, it's given us different public virtual IP. It has a different IP address. So for the previous one, Cloud VM 100, the public IP was 104.209.128.105, and here we can see it's actually 129.84. So it's unique as well. So let's try that. We'll do an NS lookup on 200. You can see it's 129.84, 129.84. And just like the other one here, when we click on connect, it will try to download the RDP file, and we are going to save that on the desktop. And it's going to be similar to previous one. What I want to show in the 8 points over here is that you remember that we put the HTTP port there. So this time it actually provided us that information here that this VM will accept connections on port 80. It's through the cloud service. So to be more specific and correct, this cloud service will allow you to connect to port 80, which will allow you to get to the virtual machine. And if we had IIS installed there and something serving on port 80, we could go to HTTP cloudvm200.cloudapp.net and view the web page. So that's how you create virtual machines in a very quick, dirty way in Azure Management Portal. Now, there are ways to create this in PowerShell as well, but we are not going to go into that session. In this session, go into that details in creating that from PowerShell, but I promise to do that in the future sessions when we will be discussing more details of creating virtual machines in Azure. However, I do want to show you some things in PowerShell because from now on, every session I mentioned earlier that every session that we are going to have, we are going to go over some PowerShell to cover what we are doing in the specific session. So if you haven't already viewed my Azure PowerShell Basics session, I think it was session 5, please go and do that because in that session I cover how you are going to connect to your subscription and access all the information. I'm not going to go and do that in details in this session, so I'm going to just go directly dive in connecting to our Azure subscription and working with these virtual machines. So I'm going to do add Azure account. It's going to fire up this little thing over here where we need to put information of our subscription or the account actually to connect to our subscription. So our account is Cloud Ranger blog, and you're going to put in the account you have. It's going to redirect and ask for the credentials. Do that right now. Put my password. We are going to wait for this to connect. As you can see, it connected to our subscription. So let's check the subscription it's connecting to. Oops, I just missed that. Get Azure subscription. And we are connected to the free trial subscription, and I know I'm working on the right one. So this is very important that you check every time to make sure you are in the right subscription. So if you have multiple subscriptions, one for your work and the enterprise and one your lab, you want to make sure that you're not messing anything up. So it's very important that you check which subscription you're connected to after you connect. So we are going to go and check the virtual machines that we have. So the commandlet for that is get-azure VM. So right now it's connecting to our subscription, and it will tell you that these are the two virtual machines that you have created, Cloud VM 100 and 200. There are other details that you can possibly get. So let's go and try to connect to get Azure VM and get more information on the Cloud VM 100. Actually, it's looking for the service name. I do not want to do that because we haven't really discussed that in detail. So I'll just do this and go for the default identifier here. So when you do a get Azure VM and do Cloud VM 100, it's going to give you all the details of the virtual machine. So this can be very helpful. So rather than going into details over here and looking at all this status information, you could do that with PowerShell relatively in a simple way. So you can see that this is the IP address. So this is the internal IP address of the virtual machine. This is the instance name. This is the name of the virtual machine. This is the DNS name. You can see it's ready and other details. And if you actually go to the 200 right now, you can see all the details here as well. You can notice the differences between these two. You can see the instance size here. We had chosen the basic A2. You can see that here as well. Now, there are ways to get more information from here as well. So we'll do something like that. Get Azure VM. Let's do something like get Azure endpoint, for example. So we are going to do that for 200. So we are going to see all the endpoints that were there for this virtual machine. So this is similar to going over here on the management portal. So you can see that here it went ahead. So there was port 80. So you can see there was one for PowerShell. There was one for remote desktop here. And they all will have the same virtual IP address. So this is the public IP address. So there are more information that you can get out of this. So you can go and rather than getting the entire thing, you can, for example, go to name and here, if we wanted to see the only one with remote desktop rather than the whole thing. So as you know, PowerShell is very powerful. So you can write your own scripts to get all this information or pass commandlets really quickly. I'll show you a little trick here. So how do you know all the commands that are there with the Azure virtual machine? Like we did get Azure virtual machine, you can use obviously PowerShell to do other things as well. So there is something called as get command, and we're going to look for any command which has Azure VM in it. So if you do a get command and you put the asterisk here and Azure VM asterisk, it will give you all the operations or all the commandlets that you can have with Azure VM in there. This is not necessarily all the commandlets because there might be commandlets that do not include Azure VM in the name of the commandlet, but they allow you to do some other operations. Like for example, we were using the get Azure endpoint earlier. But this gives you a basic picture of all the commandlets that you have. So to create a new one, for example, you can get new Azure VM, and you can set stuff as well. So you can do a set Azure VM size. You can restart the Azure VM, and you can start and stop the VM from here. So these are the different commandlets that are available, and do use help to get information on that. So if we do something like help stop Azure VM, so it will give you all the details of this commandlets on how to stop the VM, for example. So this is how you can actually explore, and on MSDN there is obviously more information on what each commandlets do, but I spend a lot of time finding help information from PowerShell this way. So we will go into more PowerShell details in future session when we do our session on creating virtual machines in more details and cover all the exam objectives. But for now, this is all that information that you really need to get started with virtual machines. Now, one last thing I want to talk about here is that we have two virtual machines here, and you can see the status is running. So I want to demonstrate something really quick here. If we go over here and turn off this virtual machine, so we are in the RDP session here, and we are turning off this virtual machine by doing a shutdown. The reason I'm going through this little details here right now at this point is to make sure that you don't go through the same things I had to do the hard way. When you have any virtual machine running over here, like we mentioned in our first session, is that everything is billable. So you are being charged for running this virtual machine. You are being charged for this storage where you are storing these virtual machines. So if you go to storage over here and you can go to, do not worry about the details here, but you can see that this is where your VHD files are stored. So you are being charged for that. You are being charged for the virtual network that Azure had created for you. So um, these are these are all billable. So um, when you stop the virtual machine from within the RDP session, you can see the status here is stopped. This one is obviously running. There is another option here to shut down this virtual machine from here. It's perfectly safe to do so. So when you do a shutdown from Azure over here, it will go through a proper Windows shutdown sequence. So if you have certain applications like SQL or Exchange or any SharePoint, this is not going to be an abrupt shutdown. It is actually going to go through a proper shutdown. And um, there is a very big difference between shutting down the VM from the RDP session and shutting down from here. If we go and shut it down from the RDP session, the status is stopped, but you are still being charged for this virtual machine. So it is holding up resources, and the public IP address that was there for you, and the internal IP as well, these are all reserved for you. So you are still being charged for this virtual machine. So if you have a big virtual machine, for example, we haven't really gone into that details, but a Series D or something where you have a very big virtual machine which takes a lot of resources, obviously you're going to be charged a lot. And if you have left this in stopped status, you're going to get billed quite a bit for it. So you'd think that, hey, I'm not using anything, I'm not going to get billed for it, but actually you are currently being billed for it. So I'll also show you the difference of shutting down from here. You'll notice that when we click on shutdown here, it says if you continue, the IP addresses that were assigned to these virtual machines will be released. So the public IP address, the internal IP addresses will be released. And let's actually choose yes to this, and let's shut down this virtual machine, and then we'll be able to see the difference. It's very important you do that because right now we are in a trial session and we get $220, and we'll try to make the most out of it. So you want to make sure everything is shut down before you are done for the day. And this goes for your infrastructure in your production or in your company as well. So if you have a lab environment, for example, and you're using Microsoft Azure for lab work, for development or whatever, you might have 5 or 6 virtual machines with your domain controllers, web servers, and whatever. So you would think the end of the day when your employee is done or you are done, you'll turn them off and you're not getting billed for it. I mean, isn't that what we are trying to do? Make the most out of our resources, only bringing up servers and getting charged for it when we want to. You want to make sure that it's not in a stopped state. If you shut down from here, as we can see right now, it's also in a deallocated state. So till you see this deallocation over here, you are going to get billed for it. So technically, if I left right now, Cloud VM 100 will still be charged till I actually go and shut it down. And you can see over here, when I click on this, there's a start option, but the shutdown is grayed out. But over here, you can see the shutdown is still there. So till you go and shut down from here, you're basically being charged. And the reason this is so important for you to understand and know is because this has burned a lot of people. I have known as well where they left a very big uh, virtual machine up and running overnight, or they have left the entire lab up and running overnight, or they left it on up and running for the entire month and thinking that they were just stopping it and that was okay, only to find out at the end of the month they'd received this huge bill from Microsoft because as far as Microsoft was concerned, turning off those virtual machines from the RDP session was not really turning off the virtual machine and releasing all the resources. So you always want to make sure it's in a stopped, deallocated state before you consider that you're not being charged for it. Having said that, you are still going to be charged for certain things. So you're not being charged for the virtual machine right now because they're stopped and deallocated, but do not forget everything is billable. This is the best part of the cloud, and this is the, well, I'm not going to say anything bad about it, but this is also something that you have to consider in the cloud. Even though you are stopped, you are using storage, right? It is still online. There's no way to turn this off. So you are still going to be charged for storing these virtual hard disks in this storage account. It's it's quite minimal to store a lot of data in Azure. Like if I left this on for the entire day and night, I wouldn't be charged too much for it. It's probably some cents. And as far as my trial is concerned, I really do not care about it. Um, if you are in an organization, you probably wouldn't worry about those couple of dollars yet. But if you have a lot of virtual machines with quite large storage uh, drives attached to it, you have to remember that you are being charged for that. You are being charged for the cloud services. You are going to also be charged for things like the virtual network. Now, there is a way to go check that, and if we go to view my bill, Microsoft actually did an awesome work in explaining what you are being charged for. So let's log into our Azure account here to look into the bill. They basically itemize the whole services that you have been utilizing, so you understand uh, that if you have like $5 charged to your account, what those $5 were for. So I am in my free trial, as it says that it's expiring in 14 days. So I'm going to click on that subscription. Just waiting for that to load. So as you can see, I have 14 days left. I have $199, and you can see it actually went and itemized everything. So my standard I/O, so data I have accessed and all that, it's up to 4.78 gigs so far, and you can see it has been only 48 cents. Compute hours, I have used about 213 hours, and it's only $20 that were used for this many hours. There was some storage transactions. So as you can see, you are built for everything, and it's very well itemized over here. Um, I used some compute hours, about an hour. So this virtual machine was up and running, so that's where the compute hours came from. So for an hour, it was just 8 cents. There were a bunch of storage transactions, obviously, and you can get into more details. So let's look at my compute hours here and click on this little graph. It will give you a little bit more details. I usually turn everything off as much as possible, but there are times I leave things on, and you can see here that it just went down and flattened out here. Um, so you are built for everything, which is good because you only pay for what you really use. So if you are not using anything, you do not get paid. So in your enterprise, you might have reasons not to deallocate them and just to stop them. So there might be reasons where you do not want to release the IP addresses or whatever. So it all depends on your business case. For our free trial, what I try to do is come to all items over here and pretty much delete everything by the end of a session. That's why every time you see me start a new session, you'll find out that there's nothing there because I try to make the maximum out of my lab dollars here or my trial dollars here. So I delete everything, so there's nothing really for Microsoft to bill. Okay, so I think that concludes everything that we have to do over here. Let's go back to our slides. Okay, so that was the creating virtual machines in Azure, the basics, and our next session will get into more details with Microsoft Azure in general. As usual, the training site is at cloudranger.net/Azure-training. We are also there on YouTube, so you can find the channel at Cloud Ranger Network. At Twitter, it's at Cloud Ranger Blog. They're also at Google+. Feel free to write your comments on the blog site or the YouTube comments section. If you need to email me for whatever reason, you can always reach me at sean@cloudranger.net. All right, so thank you for viewing, and I will see you in the next session.